In this video, I was going to talk primarily about the situation in Russia, but I think it would be remiss of me not to mention today's events. A missile attack or some sort of strike on the state of Kramatorsk in Ukraine. 11 people killed at a pizza restaurant. Pizza restaurant. Among them two twin sisters and dozens injured. Um, this is basically state terrorism. It's Russian state terrorism, and it's been going on in Ukraine now for over a year. Um, it's happened in Syria, in Chechnya, in the Georgian Republic, and it's a hallmark of the Putin regime, state terrorism. And when I think back to the sort of propaganda that RT was putting out, I just want to vomit, quite frankly. Um, I mean, from no conceivable angle could this be seen as a military target. Pizza restaurant. Um, Apparently, it was frequented by foreign journalists, so whether that was a deliberate attempt to terrorize them or what, I don't know. Yeah, there was maybe soldiers there from nearby barracks, but clearly it was a civilian target. Appalling. And may history record Russia's many war crimes, mounting war crimes. But this was one of the things that analysts speculate could happen, that Putin would use the continued war in Ukraine as a sort of decoy from his domestic struggles. I will talk a bit about the domestic situation because I don't think it's irrelevant. I don't think it's a sideshow. I think Putin is now, he's at the beginning of the end. I think there's no doubt about that. Prigozhin is apparently in Belarus. He made a pre-recorded message. I'm not sure we should read too much into that. Apparently that's what he's always done. Um, He always said that this was not a coup and it was not against Putin personally, but that makes no difference. The vengeance is going to be robust, you can be sure of that. Whatever sort of deal was struck up or whatever sort of compromise Lukashenko got between Putin and Prigozhin, Putin's not known for forgiveness. So I imagine he's going to have very brutal revenge. Some sort of show trial. Maybe Prigozhin will meet a nasty accident. I'm not sure actually that will happen in this case because Putin knows, and if he has any loyal advisors left, they'll be telling him that they'll just martyrize Prigozhin if he does that. And then there's a risk that diehard Wagner fighters will, go to the leaders. All of martyrdom, so to speak. So it would be more efficient for Putin to put him in prison or something. Like that's more likely. But basically, Putin's got himself into a corner now. Whatever option he takes, I think it's the beginning of the end. Yes, this rebellion, this coup, whatever you want to call it, was put down, or changed course. But it is significant that there was no major pushback from the Russian military. So that suggests that Prigozhin had people inside in the mainstream Russian military that were sympathetic, or there was just not an appetite to resist this. And it's interesting that in Rostov on Don, there was no sort of big backlash against Wagner. Now, maybe people were scared, but the images I saw, some people were openly welcoming them. And even, it seemed almost an apathetic attitude. It's almost like Russians themselves are not that surprised by what's transpired, given some of the interviews and scenes. There have, of course, been Putin loyalists saying this is treason from Prigozhin. Um, One interesting aspect, of course, is he's not a dissident. He's not some sort of freedom fighter. He's a thug. I mean, one of his videos, he apparently held a hammer, sort of mocking those that had been executed. A Wagner prisoner who'd been taken by the Ukrainians was apparently tortured by his troops for being a turncoat, as they saw. Um, this is basically a terrorist group. Prigozhin is a thug, and he runs a very thuggish um, private army. And he's not the only figure in Russia to have it. Apparently, pretty much every powerful figure in Russia has some sort of private army. Even Putin has his own sort of elite unit of 5,000 troops that specifically guard the president. Um, but I think it's important to understand that Russia doesn't function like a normal state. It's basically like a mafia empire, and that's no cliche. It really does function like that. It's basically a state built on crime. I mean, I guess you could say the same thing about any dictatorship, about CCP in China, the junta in Burma, you name it. But specifically in Russia, I think it does work like a mafia outfit. Um, that's significant. What's interesting is Putin seemed to try to rally support, but his few remaining allies in the world basically told him it was a Russian internal matter. It's almost like they're biding their time to see what will happen. It's almost like Putin's allies know this is now the end. That's why the Chinese didn't condemn Prigozhin's rebellion. That's why the Kazakhs didn't condemn it. Um, it seemed to be Turkey was the only country that really backed Putin, and that was probably more just for strategic purposes rather than any real sympathy. Um, it's pretty obvious that whatever the case, Putin has been weakened. I mean, it's just significant the lack of domestic support he has. Of course, state media is going to be regurgitating the lines, and it'll be business as normal. But really, this so strongman image Putin's conveyed for so long, I think it really is eroding now. He just seems like a tired old. It's almost like he's one of those tired old Soviet leaders, like Andropov or Chernenko, in the early 80s, that were just well past their time. Once upon a time, Putin was probably the most powerful man in the world. He really did have an iron grip on power. And whilst Russia's still a totalitarian state and Putin still wields a lot of power, I think there's no doubt it has been seriously tested. And the Russian people have seen this. Whatever propaganda they put out, the people of Rostov know that. And it's a big city. I mean, it's over 1 million people. It's, I think, the 10th biggest city in Russia. So you can't just, you know, you can't have an entire city hoodwinked like that. And then Voronezh as well, another sizable city. So it's just, even if people like in the Far East or even troops on the front line don't know the full details of what has happened, I think most Russians know that Putin has been tested and humiliated. Um, but what is the future for Russia? That's the question. I think the West, indeed the whole world, needs to be now thinking about what will a post-Putin Russia look like. Those of us who think Putin's a threat to world peace, myself included, shouldn't be too triumphalist though, because if he was replaced by a character like Lavrov or Prigozhin, or so, probably won't be Prigozhin at this point, but Lavrov or Shoigu or someone like that, they're hardliners, they're nationalists. I don't see any of them being a Gorbachev-like figure at all. In some cases, it might even be worse. Um, Also, Russia's a nuclear state, so if you have a figure like that, if you have an unhinged figure like Prigozhin near nuclear warheads, well, one fear, of course, in Ukraine is that they will, the Russians will launch some sort of attack on the Zaporizhia power plant, similar to that dam incident recently. I mean, this is psychological warfare, but it's also it's designed to cause mass disruption in a way that even a bombing in a restaurant wouldn't cause. Now I have to watch the time here because my storage space is very limited. I'm going to wrap this up, but I think the West now needs to be looking at a post-Putin Russia because I really think it's a matter of time now, months, at the very, very most, a couple of years, at the very most. But I think Putin's done. So we need to be looking at how do we deal with a hardliner who might be as ultra-national as Putin, if not worse. We need to be looking at some sort of strategy for that. That's maybe for another video. For today, today's yet another glaring reminder of Russian state terrorism and shame on all those Russia stooges. Quick word, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. running for president. Some of the stuff he's been coming out with about Russia, about it's not in the West's interest to defend Ukraine, it's not in their interest, utterly deluded. It's an isolationist foreign policy. I think it's a disgrace, and to me, I hope he gets nowhere near the White House. The last thing we need in the White House is an isolationist who would leave Ukraine to the wolves. Um, and how dare Robert F. Kennedy Jr. talk about America and the West being warmongers whilst basically serve as an apologist for the Kremlin. That is a disgrace. He's not the first one to do it. Tulsi Gabbard and a few other prominent American politicians have come out with this nonsense. They're putting out this narrative that somehow it's the West's warmongering, utterly exonerating Russia's culpability. It sickens me, to be quite honest. Anyway, I'll wrap this up. But there's going to be a lot of questions now about Russia's future. Could it fragment like the Soviet Union? I think that's a real possibility. There'll no doubt be more videos about this in the future. Thanks for watching.